The Black Death, a shadow over Europe. This catastrophic event cast a long, dark shadow over the continent, altering the course of history forever. Written by John Kelly, author of The Great Mortality, an intimate history of the Black Death, the most devastating plague of all time. Kelly's work delves deep into the human stories behind the statistics, bringing to life the experiences of those who lived through this harrowing time. The Black Death was a devastating pandemic that left an indelible mark on history. It was not just a medical crisis, but a social and economic one as well. It swept across Europe in the 14th century, leaving no corner of the continent untouched. The speed and scale of its spread were unprecedented. This plague, caused by the bacterium Yersinia pestis, left an indelible mark on history. Millions perished, and the social fabric of Europe was forever changed. The Black Death reshaped societies, economies, and even the very fabric of European life. Entire villages were abandoned, and the labor shortage led to significant economic shifts. The Black Death, or bubonic plague, gets its name from the terrible symptoms it inflicted. The disease was characterized by the sudden onset of fever and chills. Victims suffered from painful, swollen lymph nodes, called buboes. These buboes were often found in the groin, neck, and armpits. These buboes turned black as the disease progressed, giving the plague its ominous name. The blackened buboes were a sign of the body's tissues dying. Other symptoms included fever, chills, and vomiting. The disease was excruciatingly painful and often led to a swift death. The plague was highly contagious and spread rapidly, especially in crowded cities with poor sanitation. The lack of medical knowledge at the time made it nearly impossible to control. The Black Death first arrived in Europe in the 1340s. It is believed to have been brought by trading ships that sailed from the east, carrying infected rats and fleas. It came from trading ships sailing from the east, making its way through major ports and then spreading inland. The interconnected trade routes of the time facilitated its rapid spread. The plague quickly spread across the continent, moving from city to city with alarming speed. No region was spared from its deadly reach. It affected all levels of society, from peasants to kings. The plague did not discriminate, and its impact was felt by everyone, regardless of social status. The sheer scale of death was unimaginable. Mass graves were dug to accommodate the overwhelming number of bodies, and the traditional rituals of death and mourning were often abandoned. Some historians estimate that the Black Death killed up to 60% of Europe's population. This staggering loss of life had profound and lasting effects on the continent. From east to west, the plague's deadly journey. The Black Death, one of the most devastating pandemics in human history, swept across continents, leaving a trail of death and despair. The origins of the Black Death can be traced back to Central Asia, a region known for its vast steppes and bustling trade routes. From there, it spread along trade routes, carried by fleas living on rodents. These tiny parasites hitched rides on animals and humans alike, moving silently and swiftly. The Silk Road, a network of trade routes connecting east and west, played a significant role in the plague's spread. Merchants and travelers unknowingly transported the deadly bacteria across vast distances. As ships laden with goods from the east docked at European ports, infected rats carrying plague-infested fleas disembarked. These ships were the lifelines of trade, but also the harbingers of death. The fleas then jumped onto other animals, including domesticated rats. These rats, common in medieval cities, became the perfect hosts for the plague. These infected rats quickly spread the plague throughout cities and towns. The disease moved with alarming speed, infecting entire populations within days. The Black Death's arrival in Europe was swift and terrifying. Panic and fear gripped the hearts of people as they witnessed the rapid spread of the disease. In 1347, 12 Genoese trading ships arrived in Messina, Sicily. These ships, unknowingly carrying the plague, marked the beginning of a dark chapter in European history. Many of the sailors were dead. Their lifeless bodies were a grim warning of the horrors that were about to unfold. The survivors were gravely ill, covered in boils and suffering from fever. Their condition was a testament to the virulence of the disease. The port authorities, unaware of the deadly cargo these ships carried, allowed them to dock. This decision, made in ignorance, would soon lead to widespread devastation. This decision had catastrophic consequences. The plague spread like wildfire, leaving death and chaos in its wake, forever altering the course of history. A time of suffering. Living through the plague. The Black Death's arrival in a town or city was an event of unimaginable horror. The disease spread quickly, leaving no time for people to react or protect themselves. People lived in close quarters, often in cramped and unsanitary conditions. Basic sanitation was lacking, with waste and filth accumulating in the streets. These factors contributed to the rapid spread of the plague, making it nearly impossible to contain. Imagine waking up one morning and finding your neighbor dead. The fear and panic would be overwhelming. You might see black boils on their skin, a telltale sign of the disease. You would smell the stench of death in the air, a constant reminder of the plague's presence. You would know that the plague had arrived. People were terrified, living in constant fear of becoming the next victim. They didn't understand what caused the plague. The lack of knowledge led to widespread confusion and helplessness. They didn't know how to stop it. Efforts to combat the plague were often feudal and based on superstition. Many believed it was a punishment from God for their sins. They turned to prayer and religious rituals, hoping for divine intervention to save them from the relentless scourge. Empty streets, empty lives. The immediate impact. The Black Death's immediate impact was devastating. Cities and towns became places of death. The streets were deserted. The sick were left to die in their homes or in the streets. Mass graves were dug to accommodate the dead. The breakdown of social order was widespread. People abandoned their homes and families, desperate to escape the plague. Governments struggled to function. Trade and commerce came to a standstill. The Black Death's effects were felt in every aspect of life. Religious services were suspended, schools closed. The production of food and other essential goods declined sharply. A world transformed, lasting changes in Europe. The Black Death had a profound and lasting impact on Europe. It transformed the continent's social, economic, and even religious landscape. The plague's effects were felt for centuries. One of the most significant changes was the dramatic decline in population. With so many dead, labor became scarce. This gave peasants and laborers more bargaining power. They could demand higher wages and better working conditions. The Black Death also led to a questioning of traditional authority, particularly the church. People had prayed for salvation from the plague, but their prayers had gone unanswered. This led some to question the church's teachings and authority. The rise of the laborers, shifting power dynamics. Before the Black Death, Europe operated under a feudal system. Lords owned the land. Peasants worked the land in exchange for protection. The Black Death disrupted this system. The massive death toll created a labor shortage. Peasants and laborers were in high demand. They could demand higher wages and better treatment from landowners. Some peasants even left their lords' lands to seek better opportunities in cities. This shift in power dynamics led to social unrest. Peasants revolted against the old order. They demanded better conditions. These revolts, while often brutally suppressed, were a sign of the changing times. Faith and fear. The church during the plague. The Black Death had a profound impact on the church. People looked to the church for answers and salvation. However, the plague's devastation shook people's faith. Some people turned to extreme forms of piety. They believed that the plague was God's punishment for their sins. They sought to appease God through self-flagellation and other forms of penance. Others questioned the church's teachings. They wondered why God would allow such suffering. This questioning of religious authority contributed to a growing sense of individualism and a decline in the church's power. Artistic responses, reflecting on mortality. The Black Death had a profound impact on art and literature. Artists and writers grappled with the plague's horrors. They explored themes of death, suffering, and the fragility of life. Paintings and sculptures from this period often depicted death in graphic detail. Skeletal figures, dancing with the dead, and scenes of suffering were common motifs. These works served as stark reminders of the plague's devastation. Literature also reflected the anxieties of the time. Giovanni Boccaccio's The Decameron, a collection of stories set during the Black Death, explored themes of love, death, and human nature in the face of disaster. A slow recovery, rebuilding from the ruins. The Black Death's immediate effects were utterly devastating. However, Europe eventually began to recover and rebuild. The process was slow and painful. The population gradually rebounded over time. New technologies and innovative agricultural practices emerged. These innovations helped to increase food production and improve living conditions significantly. The Black Death also had some positive long-term consequences for society. The labor shortage led to higher wages and a greater demand for skilled labor. This contributed to the decline of feudalism and the rise of a more market-oriented economy. Echoes of the past. Lessons from the Black Death. The Black Death was a defining event in human history. It left an indelible mark on Europe, shaping its future in profound ways. The Black Death serves as a reminder of the devastating power of infectious diseases. It highlights the importance of public health measures, sanitation, and scientific understanding in preventing and controlling epidemics. The Black Death also teaches us about the resilience of the human spirit. Despite the unimaginable suffering and loss, people rebuilt their lives and societies. The Black Death reminds us that even in the darkest of times, hope and the will to survive can prevail.